The morning Rhea's engagement ended, she was holding a spreadsheet about napkin folds. Not metaphorically, an actual spreadsheet. She'd built it herself, color-coded, with a column for thread count and a column for vendor lead time and a column she'd labeled Daniel's mother's preference, because Daniel's mother had opinions about linen, and Rhea had learned, in 3 years of being Daniel's girlfriend and 11 months of being Daniel's fiancé, that it was easier to track those opinions in a cell than to argue with them out loud. She was at her desk in the back office of Hendricks & Breyer Accounting when her phone buzzed a text from her sister Lola. "We need to talk. Come home." Rhea typed back, "Working until 6, 3 dots. Then, "It can't wait. It could wait. It always could." Lola had been sending it "can't wait" messages since they were teenagers. About boys, about borrowed clothes, about the time she'd backed their mother's Civic into a snowplow and needed someone to help her rehearse the lie. Rhea closed the text, went back to the napkin spreadsheet, and didn't leave until 6:14 because the Q3 reconciliation had a rounding error that was driving her insane. She found them in Lola's apartment, not their mother's house, which was where Rhea would have gone. Lola's apartment, which smelled like Daniel's cologne. That should have been the first thing she noticed. Instead, she noticed that Lola had cleaned. Lola, who once left dishes in the sink for 9 days, and that there were 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, both used, and that Daniel was sitting in the armchair that Rhea had helped Lola carry up 3 flights of stairs last spring. He stood up when she came in. She looked at the wine glasses. She looked at her sister. She looked at Daniel, who had the particular expression of a man who had prepared a speech. "Rhea," he said. "Don't," she said. He said it anyway. She stood in Lola's doorway for the entire speech. She didn't sit down. She didn't cry. She'd done the math before he finished the second sentence. The non-refundable deposit on the Elgin Street venue, $4,200. The catering minimum, $6,000. The dress, which she'd paid for herself because her mother couldn't, and Daniel's mother had suggested something more classic, and Rhea had smiled and gone to a boutique in Kensington Market and spent $2,200 on a gown that made her feel, for about 40 minutes, like someone worth choosing. That was $11,400. She also did the math on what it meant that Lola had cleaned her apartment, that Lola was wearing the earrings Rhea had given her for Christmas, that Daniel didn't look sorry, he looked relieved, which was somehow worse, because it meant this had been a weight he'd been carrying, and setting it down felt good, and the weight had been her. "We didn't mean for it to happen," Lola said. Rhea picked up her bag. She said, very quietly, "You should get those glasses off the table before someone knocks them over." She drove to a bar on King Street that she'd never been to before, specifically because she'd never been there before. She didn't want to see anyone she knew. She wanted a gin and tonic and a corner, and approximately 2 hours to sit with the fact that her entire adult life had been a misunderstanding. The bar was called the Meridian. It was the kind of place that had exposed brick and low lighting, and a bartender who didn't ask questions. Rhea ordered her drink, found a stool at the far end of the bar, and opened the napkin spreadsheet on her phone because she needed to delete it and couldn't quite make herself do it yet. She was on her second drink when the men came in. 4 of them. She noticed them the way you notice weather, not consciously, but the room changed when they entered. Conversations dropped half a register. The bartender straightened. 2 men near the door found reasons to look at their phones. The 4 men moved through the space like they owned the square footage, and they took the seats directly beside Rhea, because she was at the end of the bar and there was nowhere else. The one who sat closest to her didn't look at her. He ordered scotch, neat, and pulled out his phone and ignored her with the specific efficiency of someone who ignores people for a living. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. A scar that ran from his left jaw to somewhere beneath his collar. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of watch that doesn't need to announce itself. Rhea looked back at her phone. She deleted the napkin spreadsheet. She made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite not, and the man beside her glanced over without turning his head. "Sorry," she said. "Derated something I should have deleted a long time ago." He said nothing. Napkin folds, she clarified, and then immediately wondered why she'd said that. He looked at her then, directly, the way people who are used to assessing things look at things. Napkins. For a wedding, that isn't happening anymore. As of, she checked her watch, 2 hours and 17 minutes ago. A pause. He picked up his scotch. His loss. My $11,000 loss, actually. But yes, also that. Something shifted in his expression. Not sympathy, something more like interest, the way an accountant looks when a number doesn't match the ledger. His name, she learned much later, was Soren Vale. But that first night he didn't offer his name, and she didn't ask. And they sat in that bar for 40 minutes, talking about nothing that mattered. She'd mentioned the rounding error in the Q3 reconciliation, and he'd asked, with apparent genuine curiosity, whether it was a systemic issue or a one-time entry error, and she'd explained the difference, and he'd listened in a way that Daniel had never listened, with the focused attention of someone who understood that details are where everything real lives. She didn't notice when his men moved away from the bar. She didn't notice when the bartender stopped coming over unprompted. She noticed when a man she didn't recognize appeared at Soren's shoulder and said, in a very low voice, "The Regent situation." Soren stood. He put a card on the bar, not to her, just on the bar, and said, "The rounding error is almost always the entry. Check the source document." And then she picked up the card. No name, no title, a phone number, and the words "if you need anything resolved" in small print at the bottom. She put it in her wallet behind her transit card and forgot about it. She did not forget about it. 2 weeks later, Rhea was unemployed. This was not entirely surprising. Hendricks and Breyer had been running on borrowed goodwill for 3 quarters, and anyone who could read a balance sheet, which Rhea could, in her sleep, in the dark, had seen it coming. What was surprising was that Graham Breyer, who had hired her straight out of Ryerson and called her his best eye for detail, called her into his office on a Tuesday afternoon and told her they were restructuring, and the role she was being eliminated from was the one she'd spent 4 years building. "We're bringing in a consultant," he said, "someone with existing relationships in the sector." His nephew, as it turned out. His nephew who had a commerce degree and a golf handicap and had never, as far as Rhea could determine, reconciled anything. She cleaned out her desk in 20 minutes because she'd never accumulated much: a mug, a calculator she preferred to the computer's built-in one, a photo of her mother. She walked out into a November afternoon in Toronto and stood on the sidewalk and thought, $11,400, now no income, and a lease I can't break until April. She went home, she made tea, she opened her laptop and started rebuilding her CV. At 9:30 that night, her phone buzzed. "Unknown number, Ms. Rhea Callum. My name is Soren Vale. You sat beside me at the Meridian 2 weeks. I have a professional matter that may be relevant to your current situation. If you're interested, call this number." She stared at it for a long time. She thought about $11,400. She thought about her nephew consultant replacement. She thought about the way Soren Vale had listened to her, explained the difference between systemic and entry-level rounding errors, like it was the most important thing anyone had said to him all week. She called. The meeting was at a building on Bay Street that didn't have a sign. The lobby had a security desk and a man in a suit who looked at her like she was a variable in an equation. Soren Vale met her on the 14th floor, in a room that had floor-to-ceiling windows and a table with files stacked with the particular precision of someone who understood that disorder has a cost. He looked the same as he had at the bar. She'd half expected him to look different in daylight, smaller or more ordinary, but he didn't. The scar was more visible. The watch was the same. He offered her coffee, and she said yes because she needed something to do with her hands. He told her what he needed. His organization. He called it that. His organization, without elaboration, had acquired 3 businesses in the past 18 months through what he described as complicated transactions. The books were a disaster. Someone had been moving money through them in a way that was creative but not sustainable, and would, within the next 6 months, attract attention that he wanted to avoid. "I need someone who can look at these records and tell me the truth," he said. "Not what I want to hear, What's actually there? What kind of organization? Rhea asked. He looked at her. That direct, assessing look. The kind, he said. That requires discretion. She already knew. She'd known when she'd Googled the building's address and found nothing. She'd known when the security guard had taken her phone at the door and returned it at the elevator. She'd known since the bar, if she was being honest, when 4 men walked in and the room changed. She should have left. Any person with reasonable self-preservation instincts would have thanked him for the coffee and left. How long? She asked instead. 6 weeks. Possibly 10? Rate? He named a figure. She kept her face still, which took effort, because the figure was approximately what she made in 4 months. I'll need access to the original documents, she said. Not copies. Originals. And if I find something that can't be fixed quietly, I'll tell you, and what you do with that information is your business. But I won't sign off on anything I can't actually sign off on. A pause. You set conditions. I'm an accountant. Conditions are how I stay out of prison. He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then he almost smiled. Not quite, but close, and said, 14 days to start. Bring your calculator. She brought the calculator she preferred. She also brought a notebook and 4 pens, and the particular expression she'd developed over the years for rooms full of men who underestimated her, which was no expression at all. The books were worse than he'd said. Not worse in the sense of unfixable. Rhea had seen worse, technically. Worse in the sense of deliberate. Someone had known exactly what they were doing, layering transactions through 3 shell accounts, using the restaurant businesses as a mixing board, keeping nothing traceable in any single ledger, but leaving everything inferable if you looked at the full picture. It was almost elegant. It was also going to collapse inside of 4 months, not 6, because whoever had built it hadn't accounted for the city's new commercial reporting threshold, which had changed in July, and which Rhea had flagged in a newsletter that, apparently, criminal bookkeepers did not subscribe to. She worked in a small office off the 14th floor. She was given a key card and a laptop that was not connected to the internet, and access to a man named Fitch, who brought her coffee and answered practical questions, but was clearly not there to answer any other kind. Soren came in on the 3rd day. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the files she'd spread across the table in the particular arrangement that made sense to her, and no one else. She'd built a physical ledger of the discrepancies, post-it notes in 3 colors, a running total in the margin of her notebook, a timeline she'd mapped against the city's inspection schedule. You work differently than I expected, he said. This is how I see it, she said. Some people make charts. I make geography. He came closer and looked at the table, not over her shoulder, beside her, like someone who actually wanted to see what she was seeing. The problem isn't the 3 businesses, she said. The problem is whoever built this system assumed the city's reporting threshold was static. It changed July 11th. Everything after that date is over the new limit, and there are 43 transactions after July 11th. A silence. How did you find that in 3 days? He asked. I read the July newsletters, she said. All of them. He looked at her. She looked at the timeline. Who did this work? He asked. I don't know who, but I can tell you when they stopped paying attention. November last year. The entries change after November. The intervals are irregular. The amounts are rounded in a way that suggests estimation rather than documentation. Whoever was doing this carefully stopped caring around November. Another silence. November, he said, was when I fired my previous financial advisor. Then the person you brought in after him was improvising. He said nothing. Do you want me to fix it or just tell you what's there? She asked. Both, he said, but tell me first. So she told him. All of it, including the parts that were bad, and she watched him absorb it with the stillness of someone who has learned that reacting to information is a luxury he can't afford. He asked 3 questions, all of them precise, none of them defensive. He didn't argue with her numbers. He didn't suggest she might be wrong. He wrote something in a small notebook he kept in his inside pocket and said, "What do you need?" She told him. He arranged it. That was the 1st week. The trouble started in the 4th week, when Rhea came in on a Monday morning and found her office had been searched. Not obviously. Someone had been careful, but Rhea was the kind of person who placed her notebook at a specific angle on a specific corner of the desk, and the notebook was half a centimeter off, and the stack of files was ordered differently from how she'd left it. Same files, different order, as if someone different threw them, and as if someone to reconstruct the sequence without understanding the logic of it. She sat down. She thought about it. Then she went to find Fitch. "Someone was in my office," she said. Fitch looked at her with the particular blankness of a man being paid to have that expression. "I'd like to speak to Vale," she said. "He's not in until, then I'll wait." She waited for 2 hours in the 14th floor corridor. When Soren came in at 11, she was sitting in the chair outside his office with her notebook and her particular no expression, and he stopped when he saw her and said, "What happened?" "Not a question," she told him. He listened without interrupting. Then he made a call, short, in a language she didn't recognize, and came back and said, "It won't happen again." "I need to know if anything was copied," she said. "It wasn't." "You know that for certain?" "Yes." She looked at him. "If someone in your organization doesn't trust me, I need to know. Not because I'm offended, because it changes what I do and don't put on paper." He held her gaze. One person raised concerns about bringing in an outside. It's been addressed meaning they understand, or addressed meaning they don't have access to this floor anymore. He almost smiled again. Both. She went back to her office. The notebook was at the correct angle. She didn't ask how. That afternoon, he brought her coffee himself. Fitch was apparently doing something else, and set it on the corner of her desk and looked at the posted geography for a moment. "You're not what I expected when I gave you that card," he said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who would ask fewer questions." "You hired an accountant," she said. "We're professionally obligated to ask questions. It's in the code of conduct." This time he did smile. Not large, a controlled thing, like most expressions he made, but genuine, and it changed his face enough that she noticed, and noticing made her look away at her notebook. In the 6th week, she found the second set of books. She hadn't been looking for them. She'd been tracing a deposit discrepancy through one of the restaurant's supplier invoices when she found a file folder tucked inside a binder of equipment leases, and inside it was a parallel ledger, handwritten, coded in a system that was almost clever, that documented a separate stream of income that did not appear anywhere in the record she'd been given. She sat with it for a long time. Then she went to Soren's office and put it on his desk and sat down across from him and said, "This was in the restaurant files. I don't know if you knew it was there." He looked at the folder. Something crossed his face, not surprise, but something darker. "I didn't," he said. "I believe you," she said, "because if you'd known it was there, you wouldn't have hired someone like me to go through those files." He looked up at her. "The person who built this second ledger was trying to skim," she said. "Small amounts, consistent intervals, coded so it would look like infantry variants. It's actually quite good. If I hadn't been chasing some supplier discrepancy, I might have missed it. Over 18 months. The amount is?" She turned her notebook to face him. He looked at the number. His jaw tightened. "I can trace it further," she said. "I can probably tell you which account it was going to. But I wanted to show you first, because this is the kind of thing that changes the shape of what I'm doing, and I don't like it when the shape changes without warning." "Rhea," he said. It was the first time he'd used her first name. She'd been Callum, or occasionally you, which she hadn't minded because she understood it was how he talked to people he was still measuring. "This is more complicated than I represented to you," he said. "When I brought you in—" "I know," she said. "I've known since the second day. It's fine. I just need you to not lie to me going forward, because I can work with complexity, but I can't work with deliberately wrong information." A long pause. "The second ledger," he said, "connects to a problem I've been managing for 8 months. There's a man, his name doesn't matter, who has been attempting to build leverage against my organization. He placed someone inside 18 months ago. That person has been slowly redirecting funds." "Where is that person now?" she asked. He met her eyes. No longer an issue, she decided not to ask what that meant. The money that was redirected, she said, can be recovered. Some of it. The trail goes cold after the third transfer, but the first two are traceable, and the amounts are recoverable if you move before the end of the quarter. That gives you. She checked the date, 19 days. Can you structure the recovery? I can structure the paperwork so it looks like a vendor correction and an inventory write-back. It won't survive a forensic audit, but it'll survive a standard review. That's sufficient, he said. Okay, she said. She picked up her notebook. Then I need the original supplier agreements and the equipment lease signatures. Fitch can get them, Rhea. She paused at the door. Thank you, he said, for bringing this to me directly. She looked at him. It's your money, she said. Of course I brought it to you. The 10 weeks ended on a Thursday. Soren had asked her the week before whether she was interested in a permanent arrangement. Same terms, expanded scope, no pretense that the organization was anything other than what it was. She'd said she needed the weekend to think about it, which was true, and spent the weekend making a list of reasons to say no, which was also true. The list was long. The list was reasonable. The list contained words like liability and extractability and long-term professional consequences, which she'd written in 2 columns like a ledger, assets on one side, risks on the other. The risks column was longer. She kept thinking about the second ledger, about the way he'd said I didn't, not defensive, not explanatory, just the fact of it, about the way he'd asked what do you need and then arranged it, every time, without argument. She thought about Daniel, who had listened to her talk about work exactly twice in 3 years, and both times had said that sounds stressful, babe, and changed the subject. She thought about Graham Breyer, who had called her his best eye for detail, and then replaced her with someone who didn't have to be. She thought about Soren, who had listened to her explain rounding errors at a bars, like she was Tuesday night, like she was saying something worth hearing. She went back on Monday and told him yes. He didn't look surprised. He didn't say, I knew you would. He said, the Meridian situation from the second quarter needs a second look, and there's a property in Etobicoke with irregular depreciation. I'll need the original purchase agreement, she said. Fitch will have it by noon. She went to her office. The notebook was at the correct angle. The coffee was already on the corner of the desk. Outside, Toronto was doing what Toronto did in January. Grey and flat and relentlessly indifferent. And the 14th floor was quiet and warm. And Rhea Callum opened the Etobicoke file and found, on the second page, a depreciation schedule that someone had built in a hurry and gotten almost right, which was the same as getting it wrong. And she picked up her pen and started at the beginning, the way she always did, because that was where the truth was, if you were willing to look for it.